Hey, ladies and gentlemen, this is some Christian guy back again. Thank you for tuning in. Today I'm going to be talking about the flesh versus the spirit and the Bible verse that concerns it, and to try and make some sense out of it, because there's a lot out there, and I would like to make it very, very particular, and I want to use the lens of the Big Five personality trait theory. I've spent a lot of time talking about it. I find that is very, very useful. Now, this is obviously not exhaustive. This is not everything you could say about the particular text, so don't think that it is, right? But what is, when we talk about the, it's good to make things as particular and as how can you say, as down to earth as possible for people to understand it, and because for a lot, again, as Christian, and this is particularly important for Christians, because we want to evangelize, right? And if we go out and someone, let's say, and I was an atheist, so I get this, right? I understand the dilemma, right? From the other side is people come to you and they're like, oh, you must walk in the spirit and not the flesh. You sort of look at it, it's like, what the hell exactly does this mean? Right? What does it mean? You know, and how can we be more, how can you say, more contemporary in the way of how we explain it, right? I'm not in for fads and all this kind of stuff, but how do we make it real? And even how can we even explain it scientifically, right? So I believe that looking at this verse through the lens of the psychology, of the psychological literature, and the trait and the personality trait theory, I think it makes it very, very easy to understand. So first, let's quote the verse, right? It's found in Galatians 5, and it runs from 16 down to verse 23. I'm going to stop it there, but go and have a read to the whole thing, right? So Galatians 5 verses 16, it says, "This I say then, walk in the spirit, and ye shall not fulfill the lust of the flesh." Okay, right. Verse 17, "For the flesh lusteth against the spirit, and the spirit against the flesh, and these are contrary to the one to the other." So there's kind of like a battle inside going between two things, right? This is sort of the gist that we're getting at. So the spirit and this flesh. But what is this? The flesh we could kind of understand. The flesh, right? This is the body, right? The spirit, what the heck is that, right? "But if you be led by the spirit..." Oh, hang on. So verse 17 still. "For the flesh lusteth against the spirit, and the spirit against the flesh. And these are contrary to one another, so that ye cannot do the things that you would," right? So there's this battle, and you can't, and something's stopping you from doing whatever you want, right? "But if you be led by the Spirit, you are not under the law. Now the works of the flesh are manifest," right? So it says, how do you know you're being led by the flesh, right? The works of the flesh, the deeds, the things that the flesh calls you to do. It says, what are these? Adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lasciviousness, idolatry, witchcraft, hatred, variance, emulations, wrath, strife, sedition, heresies, right? Verse 21, "Envyings, murders, drunkenness, revilings, and such like, of which I tell you before, as I have also told you in time past, that they which do such things shall not inherit the kingdom of God." Verse 22, "But the fruit of the Spirit," that means the stuff that the Spirit produces, "is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meek, temperance. Against these things there is no law." Right, so we're going to stop it there. Now, how do we understand this, right? Here's what we have to... Now, here's the thing. It says there's the flesh and the spirit. So the flesh wants hatred, sedition, heresies, idolatry, uncleanness, fornication, all these kinds of things, right? But the spirit is love, joy, peace, and all these kinds. Now, here's one thing that we have to note. The stuff which is of the flesh, the adultery, the hatefulness, and all the drunkenness, and all these kinds of things, these things are really easy to do. Very easy, right? And we want to do them, right? Now, here's the thing. We want to do that. They're like, yeah, you know, kind of thing, right? But here's the thing. And we're very, very much inclined to do those things. Yeah, a lot of fun, whatever the case might be. Even though sometimes by doing it, we might actually regret it and feel bad later. So we don't necessarily want them, right? And here's the things of the Spirit, right? It says the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meek temperance. These are things we actually want, and you hear about it all the time, especially social justice warriors going all over the place, right? It's like we need to be more gentle and more caring and more patient and all these kinds of things. That's what we want to do. But one thing you'll notice is these things are a hell of a difficult to get right all the time. It's really tough. It's really, really tough, right? So what do we have here? What is the thing? What is the issue? When it's talking about the Spirit versus the flesh. Now, obviously, as Christians, we believe that when we're being led by the Spirit of God, the Holy Spirit, obviously, it has an influence over us to help us to do what is right. Okay. But now, setting that aside for a minute, to talk about how do we look at it psychologically, human beings, where are we? If we look at the big 5 personality traits, if I can remind you guys what those are, we have openness, we have conscientiousness, we have extroversion, we have agreeableness, and we have neuroticism, or otherwise known as sensitivity to negative emotions. Now, here's the thing. Depending on where you lie, because if I read the works of the flesh here, right? If I read the flesh, envyings, murders, drunkenness, revelings, right? Strife, wrath, hatred, heresies, sedition, right? Let's go through it, right? Adultery, fornication. Now, when you look at it as an individual, if you think about yourself, right, how many of these things do you actually struggle with? And you'll find I don't struggle with all of them, right? So, for example, you may struggle with adultery and fornication, right? You might be a horny old goat, right? Totally like every pair of legs or every bundle of muscles that walks past you, you're like, right? Might be terrible, right? Adultery, you might, oh my goodness, right? You might have a problem with that, but drunkenness, alcohol holds absolutely no appeal to you whatsoever. So you might not necessarily struggle with every single one of these things. And this is very, very interesting, right? Because we might, depending on who you are, you might struggle with most of them or with almost none of them except for 1 or 2. And here we got hatred, wrath, even witchcraft. Interestingly enough, witchcraft is actually a tough one to get into because it's quite an elaborate thing. But basically, witchcraft. Think about if you think about, let's say, Satanism. It says, "Do what thou wilt," right? Just do whatever you want, right? And witchcraft, these pagan people are very attracted to these pagan religions because you can, for the most part, do whatever you want and rationalize whatever you want and things like that. It is even if you want to be a very violent person, there is a pagan deity out there that you can worship in order to allow the full expression of your violence, right? So these things are there, right? So that's sort of where it ties in, where you want to do whatever you want, idolatry and so on and so forth. So if we look at the big 5 personality traits, we can see that depending on where you are on the big 5 personality traits, you are going to be more inclined to some of these things than to others. So for example, if you are very low in agreeableness, right? So agreeableness is the trait. If you are high in agreeableness, means you are very cooperative, means you are very compassionate, you consider other people, you're empathetic, you think about how they feel, you think about how your actions affect other people, and all these kinds of things. You really, really care about other people, and you like interpersonal relationships and all these kinds of things. So if you're someone that is very agreeable, right, then something like hatred, variance, wrath, strife, these are things that you're not going to really have a problem with, right? Because you're agreeable, right? You care about other people and you would rather be friends with them and you'd rather negotiate on their behalf and always make sure that they do well. However, if you are very, very low in agreeableness, so if you're disagreeable, then you're going to have a problem with these things, right? Hatred, variance, wrath, strife, and all of these kinds of things. People are very, very disagreeable. They don't mind getting into a fight and all these kinds of things. They don't mind being rude to people and hurting other people's feelings and getting into conflict, right? They don't mind that at all, right? So if you're a person, so depending on where you are on this personality trait, let's say you have a circumstance, right? So you have a situation where someone says to you, "I don't like you," right? If you're a very agreeable person, you will try to understand, well, why is that? How can I fix what, can I maybe do something to reconcile us, right? maybe I am doing something wrong, and I'm sorry for offending you. Right? That's what an agreeable person will do. But a disagreeable person will say, well, if you don't like me, you can get stuffed. I don't care. Bugger off. Right? So that's how these things play off. And if you're a very, very disagreeable person, people who are like down in like the 10th percentile or lower in agreeableness, they're the type of people that actually almost just look for a fight all the time. It's really, really horrible. So that's where these things lie. So when we talk about, so let me give you another example. Let's say you are very conscientious, very, very conscientious, right? So people who are conscientious have very, very good impulse control. They like to delay gratification, so they plan for the long term. Instead of being satisfied now, they plan for the long term. They're very concerned about rules. They like to obey rules. They respect hierarchies. They respect authority and things like that. So if you're someone who, they're very, very concerned about right and wrong, they're very black and white people, right? So if you're high in conscientiousness, right, you're not going to necessarily be committing adultery and fornication, again, because fornication is like that instant gratification, just go and hook up culture, right? Just go and shag whoever the hell you want and, get your rocks off kind of thing, right? So if you're high in conscientiousness, you're not going to do these things, right? You're going to have that self-control. You're not going to be drunkenness and reveling is not something you're going to really, really do. So those are things you're not going to really have a problem with. But if you are very, very low in conscientiousness, then you will struggle with these things: adultery, fornication, drunkenness, revelings, and things like that. And here's the interesting thing: when it talks here about envyings and murders, right? So envyings, like you're jealous of other people, and you could even wish have like malcontent towards them, and murders and things of that sort. If you are very, very low in agreeableness and very low in conscientiousness, you are much more likely to actually commit these problems. So, for example, if you go to a prison, right? Every single one of them, if you give a personality test to these people, you're going to find they are all low in agreeableness, low in conscientiousness, right? Because if you're low in conscientiousness, you don't mind breaking the rules, and if you're low in agreeableness, you don't mind hurting other people, so you will murder, you will aggravate, assault, and all of these kinds of things. Those are the things that you're going to be most likely to do. So these are things that you have problems with. Even something like heresies, right? Heresies is like there's heresies is almost like, there is a heresy in the biblical context where this is the truth and this is the revelation of God, and if you teach something contrary to that, well, then that's a heresy. So if you're high in conscientiousness, you're a lot more likely to obey the rules and abide the rules and say, well, this is how things are, and I will stick with this in this framework, rather than going out of this framework all the time. Now, here's an interesting thing: if you're very, very high in openness, you're also a lot more likely, and typically people who are high in openness like to be outside of the box with new ideas and things like that. And a lot of the times when you see very strange religions come out, right, it's usually people in those religions who are so high in openness that they just all the rules will just go right out of the window. They just make up their own stuff. And you'll find that people who are very, very high in openness tend to be drawn more to your sort of alternative religions and your pagan stuff. People who are very, very, very high in openness, whereas people who are high in conscientiousness tend to drift towards more your established religions and things of that sort. Basically, obviously, it's not always the case. For example, I'm a Christian, right? I'm of the Seventh-day Adventists, and Seventh-day Adventists are very, very conservative, but which is nothing like my personality. My personality, I'm in the 97th percentile of openness, and I'm only in the 77th percentile for conscientiousness. So it's very, very unusual for someone like me to be a part of that. But before I was a Christian, right, even though I was raised a Christian, I left the faith, and I went in. Not only was I an atheist for a very long time, but I went into all kinds of other pagan religions and stuff like that. Because of my openness, these things intrigued me and stuff like that. So I went to a lot of spiritualism and the New Age and occultism and all that kind of stuff. So I've had that experience with all of these things. So that's how we understand this, right? So when you're talking about the flesh is literally What does your biology, what does your body want, right? So even when we talk about food, so it talks here about revelries, right? Under revelries, most people usually think about getting drunk or getting high and all these kinds of things. But revelries, it also includes like overeating, right? Like a feast. So in the olden days, what you usually had, like if you go back to like the medieval times and even before that, right? But we typically know the medieval kings and queens and the royalty to do this, where they would have a banquet, right? And they would eat to the point where they're about to burst. And what they would do in order to be able to continue eating, they would have like a some sort of container, and they would vomit into that, right? They would literally throw up all of the food into that in order to empty their stomachs so that they could continue eating on the feast, so that they could literally eat all night, because what they would do is they would eat until they were full, then they would vomit, get rid of all the food, and they would carry on eating, and this would carry on, which is one of the reasons why they had such bad teeth and all that kind of stuff. And that's just absolute evil. Now, here's the interesting thing, what a lot of people don't realize. All of your foods which are considered comfort foods, all the binge foods, the stuff that we usually have at a party, is high fat, high sugar, high salt. And these things are very, very stimulating to the body, right? High fat, high sugar, these things, what they do is they actually activate the opioid systems in your brain. So what you call your endorphins. A lot of people don't realize your endorphins are triggered, and your endorphins then trigger the dopaminergic reward system in your body, and so you get addicted. You literally can be addicted to food, right? Things like cheese, things like Coca-Cola, your high sugar things. You're literally physically addicted to those things, because what a lot of people don't understand is drugs like heroin, your opiates, work in the exact same way, are triggering the exact same systems that your high fat, high sugar foods are doing, right? It's your endorphins, which then it kicks your endorphins, and the endorphins kick your dopaminergic reward system, and boom, once you do that, you get addicted, and you want more, because that makes you feel good, it makes you feel happy, it makes you feel comfortable, it gets rid of pain, because the opioids get rid of pain. And a lot of people, especially if you're depressed, you see a lot of people who are suffering from depression. And interesting enough, this is why a lot of women tend to like sweets and chocolates and stuff like that, because women are higher in neuroticism, which is sensitivity to negative emotions. And negative emotions like sadness, frustration, things like these are actual pain states. And if you take things that are opioids, so like things like morphine and things of that sort, heroin, it actually brings down that pain, right? So if you like, in the same way, like if you cut your arm and you take an opiate, the pain goes down, you don't feel the pain as much. And this is literally what people are doing when people are going and binging on foods, especially if they suffer depression and stuff like that. What they're doing is they're literally self-medicating. And what a lot of people don't realize is, especially your dairies, your cheeses and stuff like that, there's your dairy has got a protein called casein, and the casein gets broken down in your digestive system into something that's called a casomorph. And a casomorph is about 1/10 the strength of morphine, of 1/10 the actual strength of morphine. And in cheese, this protein is very, very concentrated, which is why most people, when they go to rehab, one of the things they find is and people that clean up their diets, or who go from rehab and all that kind of stuff, one thing they always crave more than anything else is cheese. Cheese, interestingly enough, is actually the single most stolen food on the market, is because cheese has this opioid effect from the casomorphs, as well as having the sugar from lactose and the fat, which then triggers your endorphins, which then triggers your dopamine and makes you addicted to it. So this is what the Bible is talking about, is when it's talking about the flesh, it's talking literally about what your body wants. Your not only what your body wants in terms of the addictive stuff from the food and the substances, the drink, so strong drink also does the same thing, right? Does the same thing. You get a dopaminergic effect, and that's why people get so addicted to it. Alcohol is exceptionally addictive. So all the drunkenness and stuff like that, and all of these substances change your personality as well. So it makes you less conscientious. So for those of you that are interested, I did how alcohol changes your personality. Check that out. It makes you less agreeable, which means you're more likely to fight. Makes you less conscientiousness, which means you're more likely to break rules. It makes you higher in neuroticism, which means you're more likely to be easily offended and feel negative emotions and stuff like that. So that's the body. in terms of the substance, and then there's the flesh in terms of your personality traits. Your personality traits are biologically set as a child when you are born, and your first knee-jerk reaction, that's your flesh responding. That's your flesh telling you, do this. That first reaction to any situation, and it's like, do this, fight or run, because this is that fight or flight thing. Some people think flight, some people think fight. If you are low in agreeableness, you will fight. If you're high in agreeableness and high in neuroticism, you're more likely to run, right? Most definitely. If you're low in agreeableness and low in neuroticism, your reaction will be to fight. And if you high in neuroticism and high in agreeableness, you will run. So that knee-jerk reaction, that's your physical body's reaction. That's your personality, or the first thing you do, your first reaction. So what's the spirit? Now the spirit is what the Bible talks about. There's the spirit. So we are spiritual beings. What does this mean? What distinct? Because the animals are not spiritual beings, right? They're not spirit as far as the Christian philosophy is concerned. Animals are not spiritual beings. What is the difference between us and the animals? The difference between us and the animals is our intellect, is our self-awareness, is our character. Unlike animals, we can develop character contrary to our personality. So our character is a higher order function, right? Your prefrontal cortex, that is where you think, that is where you reason, that's where you develop character. So when you are raising a child, right, you will find if you have children, your children are all different. They're all different from the get-go, right? And then you raise them to say thank you, to put away your toys, and be conscientious and all these kinds of, you try to instill good values into your kids, right? To develop character, because character is the thing that mitigates your personality, right? If you are very disagreeable and you're low in neuroticism, your automatic reaction is to punch someone in the face. If you have well-developed character, you'll say, no, this is wrong. I must not do that. That's when you are living according to the Spirit. That's when you're living according to a higher plane of things, right? You're living according to the character, and your character, that's your spirit. That's who you really, really are, right? In the world today, most people are under the delusion that if you do whatever your body tells you, that is living authentically. That is not living authentically, living according to the flesh, right? So go and have as much sex as you want, go and take as much drugs as you want, go and do whatever you want, right? And from there, you'll find freedom. You won't. That path leads to absolute destruction. And people who go down that path eventually realize that fact. But when you live according to the character, to your character, you lead according to the Spirit. And in the Bible, we say according to the Spirit, because God is the one that establishes the moral law. And so you develop a character so that your character is in accord with God's moral law, so that when your body desires something that is inappropriate or something that it shouldn't have at the moment, right? Your character can then step in and you can control yourself in order to do the right thing, right? So this is not to say that, for example, when you say adultery and fornication, right? So sex is not the same as fornication. Sex, if you're married, sex is good, but even there it can be abused, right? There are a lot of people that even in marriage abuse their spouses, right? And this goes both ways. Men can abuse women, and women can abuse men, even in the marriage, where they're wanting stuff that's not really, really healthy. You get some funky things out there, right? But sex itself is a natural, normal desire, and in the right managed, controlled way is a beautiful, wonderful thing. But when you start abusing it, it only produces problems. And there's a whole bunch of the same thing with food. Hunger is a natural thing. The hunger is there. The body needs to feel hunger, because otherwise you would never think to eat. You would forget and you'd starve to death. So it's a natural inclination, but you have to do all of these things in manageable, and you have to control. You have to develop a character, not too much. So if I eat too much, what happens? I'm going to get fat. If I get fat, I'm risk for this, I'm risk for that, I'm risk for the next thing. I'm going to be self-conscious. I'm not going to be happy. I'm going to be depressed and all these kinds of things. And that's what the Bible is talking about for the flesh versus the Spirit. It's literally your body. What is your body telling you, and what is your higher order faculties telling you? What is the Spirit? We're spiritual beings. Your character, your person, who you really are. Because a lot of people will think, right, they will be, and this is a problem a lot of Christians have, where they will be baptized and now I'm a Christian, and they will still feel like they want to do something bad. So something will happen, you'll have that knee-jerk reaction, and like, oh, I really wanted to punch that person in the face. And they'll feel really, really, really bad about that, right? But the thing is, who you are is not that initial reaction. That's not who you are. Who you are is what you actually do. So your first voice says, hit him. That's not you. The other voice that says, hang on, maybe I shouldn't do that. That's who you really are. That's who you really are. And people, and basically, essentially speaking, people who do not have that second voice, who do not possess that second voice, and they're completely led by the body, almost as if like they're just an animal responding to things. Those people actually do not exist as persons, because they're not led by that true self that responds to the world in an appropriate manner, in a higher order manner, that looks for compassion, that looks for joy, that looks for peace and stuff like that. Because the lower order things says, I want this, and even if I have to fight, even if I have to steal, which is why there's this idea that humans are essentially good. It's nonsense, right? The body wants what it wants. For if you go and you look out in the animal kingdom, animals think absolutely nothing about ripping each other apart, survival of the fittest kind of stuff. You do get inklings of some sort of a kind of morality between like groups of chimpanzees and stuff like that, but that's very, very limited. And I mean, they still rip each other to pieces and stuff like that, and they do not share the same ethics. Like a tribe of chimps will not share that same ethics with another tribe of chimps. For example, they will go and hunt other chimps, be territorial and rip them to pieces. And there's things that as humans we know that this is completely wrong, but they're living just according to what the body tells them. I will steal, I will kill, I will do whatever it is that I want. And there's no personhood there. There's no higher order. There's no character. The actual individual, the person, is not there. It's basically just the body running around, just doing whatever it wants, and people are just living according to that. So that's what this particular Bible verse is actually talking about. So when a Christian is talking about the spirit versus the flesh, that's what they're talking about. There's a higher way, a moral, ethical way where you live, where you develop a character that's an exalted character that wants good things, that wants to mirror the character of God and the character that the Holy Spirit helps you to get, versus versus just listen to the body. If I want sex, then I'll have sex, even if it means I have to rape. If I want pleasure, then I'll just hire a prostitute, or I'll just take drugs, or I'll just punch that person in the mouth if he irritates me, or I'll just be mean to that person if I don't like them, and all these kinds of things. And it's easy to do those things. Again, depending on your personality, every one of us has these ways. For example, and no trait, and this is the thing, right? If you look at my video where I talk about lean not on your own understanding, even agreeableness can be a problem, right? You can be so agreeable where you can be taken advantage of, right? Someone who's very, very agreeable is very, very easy to be taken advantage of, and to the point where if you're so agreeable, you can actually throw the rules out because you're so agreeable and you want to give someone. So for example, women tend to be very, very high in agreeableness, and a lot of women will sacrifice themselves and have sex with someone who doesn't deserve it. So throw those rules out of that self-preservation, throw it right out the window, because they want to oblige the person who they believe loves them and who they may even love, or whatever the case might be, and so sacrifice themselves in a harmful way in order to do that. So all of these personality traits, we need the higher order, the higher spiritual order of your character and your intellect, and guidance from the scripture and from God and the Holy Spirit, to when we assess a situation, right, we don't just go with immediately what feels right. We temper that, because sometimes what you feel sometimes what you feel matches the situation, and sometimes it doesn't. And that's where we need to pay attention to these things, because it's very, very, very important. So ladies and gentlemen, I hope this helps you understand what that's all about. Whenever you're looking at a situation, just think to yourself, when you're having a reaction, your wife does something, your husband does something, or your friend does something, or something happens and you have a reaction. It's like, hang on, am I looking at this through my own bias, through the bias of my flesh, through the bias of my biological personality, my traits, right? Or am I looking at this through the higher order of my character? And am I really looking at this situation properly? And that is how you you should live through life. And that's what the Bible is trying to say. There's these other ways of doing this. And so that's what it means, walk according to the Spirit. If you walk according to the Spirit, then regardless of what your flesh does or wants, you're going to be able to control yourself. Say, no, I need to be kind, I need to be gentle, I need to be respectful, I need to obey the rules and all these kinds of things. And even if you walk according to the Spirit, you will even know which rules you shouldn't obey, right? If a rule is evil, for example, if the government today goes and says, right, we need to go out and kill people, you're going to say, no, this is wrong. Right, and I'm going to defy the government because this is wrong, right? And that's a higher moral thing. So, for example, Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union under Stalin, right? The only reason why those things could happen is because massive amounts of people were not living according to the Spirit; they were living according to the flesh. It's what I want, and because if they're high in neuroticism, I'm afraid. So I'd rather follow the government so I don't get hurt, even if it means that other person gets hurt. It's a terrible thing, and we've seen in the 20th century whole entire nations of people who, instead of following the Spirit, having the right character and doing what's right, when entire populations of people just went and did the wrong thing, and it turns out as a disaster, and we pay dearly for it. So that's it, ladies and gentlemen. I hope that helps you out with that particular verse. Questions and comments, go ahead. Find me on Facebook, on YouTube, on One Way. Just type in some Christian guy and you'll get me. And I hope to see some conversation and stuff. Any questions you have, go ahead, subscribe and share, please. This will help me out a lot. And I thank you very much for participating in your time. Cheerio, and thank you very much. Bye.